Namaste.
Namaste.
So, letting go and masturbation. The ultimate act of letting go. There's a sense in which we can believe that it was only the Buddha who said that we need to let go of attachment. But in fact, Jesus did it all the time. He just did it a little more subtly. And he tended to do it with metaphor. And that's what's certainly part of what's going on in the gospel story today. But I'd like to talk a little bit about attachment and what it is and what it isn't. Attachment is really, in the end, no pun intended, being attached to outcomes. This idea that if I do this, this will be the result. It's also the idea that we don't want things to change, which is a kind of outcome. It's all outcomes. But the idea that everything will stay as it is just now, or should have stayed as it was at some point in the past. So, how can I be looking so old when I don't feel any older, except in my physical self? How could so-and-so have done that to me? How come I'm not friends with my best friend from high school anymore? That bastard. When in fact, if we step back and get a little objective about it, life brings people in and out of our lives all the time. Now, the Buddhist teacher Noah Levine has pointed out that there are probably people that we should be attached to. Those we love, we probably should be attached to, in the sense that, especially when it comes to children, we don't want anything bad to happen to them. We want them to grow up to be happy and healthy. In relationships, it's a little trickier, and Noah uses this idea that if these are two people, this is a healthy relationship. And a healthy relationship at some point may be this person deciding that they want to go over here and learn about archery. And this person is not so excited about archery. So they can let this person go and shoot their arrows and be okay with that and not demand that they don't, knowing that they'll come back together. And an attached relationship is more like this. So this person tries to go over here and this one pulls them back and everybody starts feeling suffocated. Attachment, in the sense of our lives, is quite often either the idea that everything should be perfect, that nothing should be difficult, that we should never get sick, lose a job, lose a friendship, have our car break down. How could we possibly have hit every red light on the way here today? that somehow life is supposed to always be easy. And when it isn't, we get upset. Now the other extreme is that you could look at that and say, well, what's the point then? I'm just going to give up. But that's not what it's saying. It's saying we do our best to change the things that we don't think are satisfactory. So if we get sick, we go to the doctor. If that car does break down, we take it to the mechanic. But if in the end, the car is gone beyond repair, even though it costs us money, we don't tie our happiness to the fact that now we're going to have to get a different car. And where we get in trouble is when we tie our happiness to our solutions working out. So I fall and break my leg. And the doctors do the best they can, but I'm always going to walk with a limp. I can either say, I am going to choose to be miserable for the rest of my life because I know walk with a limp. Or I can say, that's the way it is, and it isn't convenient, and I'm going to get frustrated, but in truth, I can't change it, so I need to let it go. There's a great deal of that kind of wisdom in the 12-step movement and the serenity prayer. That if we can't change something, we can either choose to stand there and stomp our feet, whine and cry and throw a tantrum, or we can choose to look at it and say, well, that's the way it is. And maybe it wouldn't be the way that I would have it if I had my choice and had that kind of power, but I'll choose to live in a way that's realistic enough to say, I would like to cope with reality. And it all seems so really obvious. You know, it all seems like everybody should be able to get this. And yet we all know somebody who just constantly fights against it. Or we encounter people in our day-to-day life, especially at stores. You know, people returning things at stores who are really mad because how in the world could you have sold me the lawnmower that didn't work? As if the person at the cash register had any idea that the lawnmower didn't work. Why am I the one that has to bring this back? That reflects this idea that for me somehow life is all supposed to be fine. And yet if we're realistic, none of us have lived that way, and none of us have encountered anybody who's really successfully lived that way, where it was just a breeze. Nothing adverse ever happened. And the whole idea in the mythological story around the origins of the Buddha was that that was exactly what his father tried to do. Because there were two prophecies about the Buddha before he was born. One was that he could be a great king, and his father in the story was a great king. And one of the people giving a prophecy said, well, he could be a holy man and renounce the world. And his father didn't want that to happen. His father wanted him to succeed him on the throne. And so for the first 28 years, or close to 29 years of his life, he managed to keep him in a place where he never saw anything wrong. He never saw anybody sick. He never saw anybody who was poor. He never saw anybody who was old. And he lived within this palace where they were always planting flowers and making it beautiful, and he encountered no adversity whatsoever. But you know, you can't keep somebody in a box forever. And one day, a little later in life than most people would, he talked to his charioteer and said, let's go see what's going on. And during the course of a parade through town, he saw somebody in the distance that was old, so the story goes. And he said to his charioteer, what is that? The charioteer said, well, that's an old person. We all get old. And Buddha said, even me? Yeah, even you. And then gradually, as he pursued the old person to see what was going on and talk to him, he also came across people who were poor and sick, and all of a sudden, as hard as his family had tried with, at that point in time, you know, all the money in the world, they couldn't isolate him from the truth of life. The only way, unless our father happens to be the king of our little fiefdom, the only way we can go through life believing that it should be different is really through denial. We have to really ignore the evidence we see and to be able to say to ourselves, everything ought to be fine for me. And I think ultimately, this is what Jesus is trying to say yet again to his disciples when he says, unless a grain of wheat falls into the earth and dies, it can only be a single seed. But if it dies, it bears much fruit. And here it comes. Those who love their lives will lose them, and those who hate their lives in this world will keep them forever. And we think that's just turning things upside down, and to a certain extent it is. But I lost my thought already. When I love my life, I want my life to be just as it is right now. It can't possibly change. It's not even just a case of losing my life. It's a case of it changing from where it is now. I am attached to this outcome that I have to have, that nothing changes. And so in the end, I become miserable. I don't really live life. On the other hand, if I'm willing to give up my life, if I'm willing to lose my life as it is right now, which eventually will lead to death, but I mean, there's a lot of intermediate steps between here and death. And I'm willing to say, okay, today this is who I am, next week I could be somebody different. It really frees me to live, and it is kind of counterintuitive. I can either try and protect myself as much as possible, or my children, which, I can be a helicopter parent, or I can say, little Johnny's going to skin his knee sooner or later. And it will seem to me at that moment to be the end of the world, but there's a part of me that's going to remember that it's really not so bad. Little Sally has to get sick sooner or later, so I can try and keep her inside the house and not get her exposed to germs. Or I can send her to school where she's going to run into several snot-nosed kids who are going to get her sick. And in doing so, she's going to develop an immune system that's more resistant. And so by letting go, I'm actually doing her a favor. And that's really a metaphor for this whole issue. So often when we try and protect ourselves or others from adverse conditions, we really aren't protecting them. We're setting them up for something worse down the road. Now, that's not to say, that we're going to take ourselves or somebody else out and encourage them to walk up to everybody whose nose is running and grab some of it and, put it wherever they can. But it is to say that we're going to live. And we're going to let the outcome be what it is. And if it's unsatisfactory, we're going to do our best to change it. But if we can't change it, we're not going to let that ruin our lives. We're going to keep pressing on and trust a little bit in ourselves to be able to cope with whatever comes out in the end.